In 1946, Einstein had just completed his time machine and tested it by traveling back in time to 1924, arriving in Landsberg, Germany. Here, he met Adolf Hitler and proceeded to shake the would-be Führer's hand. This simple gesture resulted in Hitler's disappearance, creating a new timeline where future events would play out very differently. Perhaps the most significant of these events was World War II, which, unlike the actual timeline, was fought between the Allied powers of Western Europe and the Soviet Union. Both sides used a variety of unique equipment, vehicles, and other weapon systems, the most important of which was the Mobile Construction Vehicle, or MCV. Due to the ever-increasing mobile nature of war, Allied and Soviet commanders needed the ability to quickly establish their bases close to the battlefield. Thus, their scientists and engineers developed the Mobile Construction Vehicle. This large, albeit slow-moving truck transported all the materials needed to construct a base. Once the MCV found a suitable location, usually next to an ore mine, the crew would deploy the vehicle into a building called a construction yard. Set on a concrete foundation, the construction yard consisted of 3 parts. The first was the garage, which housed the truck portion of the MCV. It also acted as a warehouse, storing supplies and materials used to construct base buildings or defenses. The second was a gantry crane, which was used to pick up crates of materials deposited outside the garage entrance. These materials would be unpacked and used in the construction of new base buildings. The third part of the construction yard was what I'll just call the engineers' quarters. Attached to the garage and warehouse, this is where the engineers and construction crew would reside, referencing blueprints and planning out the layout of the commander's base. The MCV was a commander's most valuable unit. Without it, the commander would be unable to construct a base. When traveling, it was best for an MCV to have an armed escort, for though it was heavily armored, it had no weapons of its own. A damaged MCV could only be repaired at a service depot. When deployed into a construction yard, it was the most valuable building at a base, making it a vital target for enemies to destroy, or even capture using their own combat engineers. Engineers at the construction yard would repair any damage the building sustained. While all other buildings needed power from plants to function, the MCV was equipped with its own power generator, so it was always functioning, even if the rest of the base suffered from low power due to a lack of power plants. A commander was not limited to just one MCV. A new one could be constructed at a war factory, either to replace a destroyed construction yard or to act as a support yard. The more construction yards a commander had, the quicker they could construct new buildings, due to the extra man and materials. Of course, these MCVs could also be used to establish a new base elsewhere on the battlefield, usually to gather additional resources to support the war effort. The Mobile Construction Vehicle proved itself to be the most important unit and structure combination of the Second World War. So much so, that the vehicle would see continuous improvement in the subsequent decades after the war. The next time the MCV would see extensive use was during the First Tiberium War, between the Global Defense Initiative and the Brotherhood of Nod. Both factions fought for control over Tiberium, an extraterrestrial resource that arrived on Earth via a meteor in 1995. Since its arrival, Tiberium has spread all over the world, leaching valuable nutrients from the ground. Yet, great wealth could be gained from harvesting and refining the green crystal, so he who controlled the Tiberium could effectively control the planet. Like the Allies and Soviets before them, both GDI and the Brotherhood used the same kind of MCV. Instead of a truck, a tractor vehicle on treads pulled the trailer of the construction yard, which had 4 all-terrain wheels at the back. When deploying, the tractor unhinges itself from the trailer. The trailer opens, and engineers immediately begin using the advanced equipment to dig underground. When the subterranean bunker was complete, the tractor itself was enclosed in the trailer, and stored underground. A crane was constructed underground and brought to the surface. Meanwhile, the rest of the building's walls and roof were built. The crane would come to rest beside the construction yard's entrance. Behind the crane were a couple of fans, which were part of a ventilation system that brought air into the subterranean depths of the yard, where most of the personnel were stationed. Whenever the commander needed to construct a new building at their base, a large crate of materials would be brought up to the surface inside the construction yard's warehouse. The cylindrical roof of the warehouse would open, allowing the crane to swivel over and grab the crate. The crate would be brought outside, where the materials would be unpacked and used by engineers to construct whatever building the commander needed. Both GDI and NOD commanders could requisition additional MCVs to expand military and harvesting operations. However, due to the MCVs being outfitted with the latest technologies of the time, they were very expensive. GDI could construct new MCVs from the weapons factory, which was an upgraded version of the war factories used during the Second World War. For the Brotherhood of Nod, they preferred to construct their MCVs off-site, and then fly in the vehicles using C-17 Globemasters, which would drop the vehicle off at a Nod airfield, built close to their base. Not all construction yards during the First Tiberium War featured the same design. The ones used by both GDI and NOD during the events of Renegade were such examples. They were much larger than the ones that were built from an MCV. In fact, they may not have started off from an MCV, as there were no vehicles stored inside these construction yards. Speaking of the interior, this kind of construction yard really doesn't seem to have much inside it. At least, it looks that way based off the yard the player could enter during the mission Tomorrow's Technology Today. This building was mostly empty, with the exception of guards and a few ceiling guns. The subterranean portion of this construction yard only extended down by one level, where the Master Control Terminal was located. If this terminal was destroyed, then the construction yard ceased to function, unable to repair nearby base buildings. In my opinion, this construction yard feels unfinished, mainly due to the lack of building materials, crates, or even small vehicles like forklifts to move around all the supplies that should be stored in the building. There was a GDI version of this construction yard on the mission Rescue and Retribution. Unfortunately, it could not be entered due to the damage it sustained during Nod's attack on the base. After the First Tiberium War, GDI and Nod began to use more of their own unique structures, equipment, and weapon systems. By the time of the Second Tiberium War, in the year 2030, the MCV was one of the only units that both factions still had in common. The new MCV traveled slowly. With 4 treads, the MCV could effectively traverse rough terrain. When possible, it was best for the MCV to move across dirt or paved roads, as it could reach its destination faster when traveling over smoother surfaces. Unlike past MCVs, whose vehicle would be stored inside the finished construction yard, the vehicle of this new MCV would remain on the outside, next to the entrance of the main building. This was because the vehicle would serve a secondary function as the construction yard's crane. Whenever a new building was under construction, the crane would slide back, pick up a crate of building materials, and help engineers unpack said crate. Most crates seemed to be stored in the main warehouse, which was largely made of concrete and steel, featuring 3 ventilation fans on the roof. When searching for a place to establish a base, an MCV had to avoid veinhole monsters, as traveling over the creature's veins would cause it to attack. While the MCV could sustain some damage, it would eventually be destroyed by the veins. Since the Brotherhood of Nod made extensive use of subterranean units to infiltrate bases, it was best for commanders to build walls around their construction yards to protect them from capture by Nod engineers. Pavement placed throughout a commander's base also helped to deter such subterranean threats. GDI and Nod weren't the only ones to make use of construction yards during this time. The mutants, known as the Forgotten, used them to set up their own bases and construct buildings from both Nod's and GDI's arsenals. When Cabal rebelled against the Brotherhood during the Firestorm Crisis, any structures that were networked to Cabal fell under his control, including construction yards. New MCVs were built from the War Factory, including the Nod ones. As the Brotherhood no longer had a large air force it could rely on, flying in MCVs was not an option, so most vehicle manufacturing facilities were located underground. Speaking of war factories, both GDI and Nod developed their own mobile versions of these production buildings. As the battle line shifted, it became useful to move vehicle production closer to the front lines. While one could utilize an MCV to set up a forward base, it was very expensive to do so. It also put the MCV itself at risk of being destroyed or captured by the enemy. Based off the technology used for their MCVs, GDI created the Mobile War Factory. Soon afterward, Nod created their own version called the Fist of Nod. Both were constructed from their respective factions' stationary war factories. Like the MCVs, the Mobile War Factories were slow-moving, but they were cheaper to produce. Once at their destination, the Mobile War Factories would deploy themselves in a way that was reminiscent of the MCVs. Once deployed, they could produce any ground vehicle in their respective factions' arsenals, even an MCV itself. One unique aspect of the Mobile War Factories was their ability to pack up and move in the middle of battle. While MCVs had this capability, it was often not conducted until after the battle was over. However, that would change after the Second Tiberium War, as both GDI and Nod continued to make improvements to their MCVs. By the Third Tiberium War in 2047, both Nod and GDI had their own exclusive mobile construction vehicle designs, utilizing the latest in construction and mobilization technology. Mobile construction vehicles, or MCVs, are deployed to all major theaters to serve as the foundation for a forward operating base. The MCV is capable of rolling over any relatively clear terrain. It is not equipped for self-defense. When an MCV reaches its destination, it can immediately unpack into a construction yard, capable of building production structures, a Tiberium refinery, and other elements needed for a forward base. The construction yard can be packed up into the MCV at any time, although it is only advised when the base it supports is no longer being used. Due to military funding cuts and a shift in focus to Tiberium abatement after the Second Tiberium War, GDI's MCVs went back to a more simplified design, one based on the MCVs used during the First Tib War.
Construction vehicle ready to roll.
Two small vehicles were used to transport the construction yard. The first vehicle was at the front, featuring two large wheels able to traverse various terrain types. The second vehicle was a gantry crane, which was attached to the main building of the yard. The crane had four small wheels, which the rest of the MCV rode on. Once a suitable location for a base was found, the MCV would deploy. The two vehicles detached themselves from the main building, as walls were erected around it, and a steel foundation was placed below the building. Both the vehicles would park themselves just outside the construction yard's main entrance. From the open back of the construction yard, one can see crates full of materials popping up from underground. The smaller forklift vehicle would periodically go inside the warehouse, grab one of these crates, and bring it outside. After the crate had been emptied of its contents outside the warehouse, the gantry crane would grab the now empty crate and place it back underground, where it would be refilled with new construction materials produced by nano-assemblers below the construction yard. Once the construction yard was no longer needed to support the current base, it was packed up in the opposite manner that it was deployed. The new Nod MCV wasn't a wheeled vehicle like GDI's. It was a full-fledged mechanized walker.
The cities of Nod will rise.
With its four legs, the Nod MCV could walk across even the roughest of terrain types, especially in zones heavily infested with Tiberium. When deploying, the legs of the Nod MCV folded down and inward toward the main body. The body would spin 180 degrees as a steel foundation and scaffolding were constructed from the ground up, supporting the rest of the building, which, in true Nod fashion, resembled a scorpion. Along the tail of the construction yard was a crane that picked up crates of construction materials from the manufacturing facility below the building. The crane brings these crates to the back of the building, where they are unloaded by engineers, the materials being used to construct new base buildings and defensive structures. Similar to GDI's MCV, when the Nod one needed to relocate elsewhere, it would transform back into its mechanized form in the opposite manner that it was deployed. The GDI and Nod MCVs of the Third Tiberium War had significantly wider building radiuses, enabling commanders to build and support larger bases. In addition, each MCV was equipped with its own radar. so the commanders no longer needed to rely on a separate structure to provide such an essential component of battlefield operations. While construction yards were the most heavily armored buildings at a base, they could be further protected via GDI's sonic repulsion fields, or NOD's laser fences. These barriers in particular prevented enemy engineers from capturing the construction yard. However, these barriers would be removed when a construction yard transformed into an MCV, and would not return when the MCV transformed back into a construction yard. The vehicle was at its most vulnerable during its transformation from MCV to yard, and vice versa. Enemy forces could inflict a significant amount of damage if they attacked during the transformation. Damaged MCVs could be repaired by the drones that hovered around the war factories. Of course, the engineers at the deployed construction yard would just conduct their own repairs. Just like in past wars, new MCVs could be constructed at a war factory. But now they could also be constructed at more substantial production buildings, such as the Redeemer Engineering Facility for the Brotherhood and the Reclamator Hub for GDI. Sometimes, an MCV by itself wasn't enough for a commander to establish a base quickly. In such cases, one of the first structures to be erected was a crane. Cranes used by both GDI and NOD aided in the construction of production, support, and technology-related buildings. The exception were structures related to defense or superweapons, as engineers at the yard were the only ones authorized to oversee their construction. Cranes also required power from plants to function, unlike the construction yards, which always came with their own power generator. NOD and GDI also developed smaller, downsized versions of the MCV, represented by the Emissary and Surveyor. Sometimes, it would be too dangerous for a commander to move their MCV away from their initial base, so smaller vehicles like the Surveyors and Emissaries could be assembled and deployed from the construction yard itself, able to go out and establish an outpost for military or harvesting operations. While cheap to build, these vehicles were extremely fragile, both in their mobile and deployed states. Unlike the MCV, which could instantly deploy itself, the Surveyor and Emissary took some time to unpack. Once complete, new buildings or defenses could be constructed within a small radius around the deployed outpost, thanks to their ability to maintain communications with the construction yard. Commanders had to be careful about where they deployed a Surveyor or Emissary, as once done, they were incapable of reverting back to their mobile form. The Global Defense Initiative had one more vehicle in their arsenal that was based off the technology used in their MCV. The Rig, as it was called, was designed to move into enemy territory and quickly deploy into a well-armed battle-based structure. Equipped with 2 Guardian cannons, both of which could be upgraded with railguns, and a missile launcher atop the base's tower, it was capable of engaging enemy vehicles and aircraft. The battle base was also equipped with advanced sensors to detect nearby stealth units. The battle base's crew would deploy repair drones to fix up any damaged friendly vehicles nearby. Just like at the construction yard, the battle base crew could be ordered to personally repair any damage it sustained in combat. When it needed to relocate, the battle base could quickly transform back into its mobile rig form. One thing that surprised the humans about the Scrin, aliens that invaded Earth in later stages of the Third Tiberium War, was how similar they were when it came to conducting combat operations against the planet's indigenous population. The Scrin had their own mobile construction vehicle in the form of the drone ship. Initially fused together, forming a large spacecraft, the drone ships fell individually to Earth after being split apart by GDI's ion cannons. Upon making landfall, the drone ships deployed to become drone platforms, able to warp in buildings for power, harvesting, unit production, and other technological advancements. To establish a new base elsewhere, the drone platform would lift off, transforming back into a ship and becoming airborne. Thanks to its flight capabilities, the drone ship could fly over mountains and cliffs, something that GDI's and NOD's MCVs were incapable of doing. Once it found a suitable landing site, the drone ship would become a platform, driving a giant spike into the ground to provide stability to the towering structure. Like NOD's and GDI's MCVs, the deployment process was when the drone ship was at its most vulnerable. Because the drone ship was a type of aircraft, it was warped in through the Scrin's gravity stabilizer, which was the equivalent of GDI's airfield, or Nod's air tower. The Scrin had their own version of the human's crane called the Foundry, which contributed to base construction using nano-assemblers. The Scrin also had an equivalent unit to the surveyors and emissaries of GDI and Nod called the Explorer. Thanks to its hover capabilities, the Explorer would float across the battlefield, usually in search of a new Tiberium field to establish harvesting operations at. Once it found a suitable location, the Explorer would plant itself into the ground as part of its deployment process into an outpost. Thankfully for Nod and GDI, the Scrin force that invaded Earth was largely a civilian one, focused on harvesting Tiberium, enabling the humans to ultimately defeat the alien invaders. A small number of Scrin made their escape through the last of their standing towers, Threshold 19. As of 2054, Nod maintained control of this tower, working to unlock the secrets held within it. Meanwhile, GDI keeps a close eye on the tower, and doing all they can to stem the tide of Tiberium proliferation. While things may be calm now, future conflicts could erupt at any moment. Whether that be the age-old rivalry between Nod and GDI, or a second invasion by the alien Scrin. One thing is certain, commanders will continue to use new and improved mobile construction vehicles to quickly establish bases and engage in combat operations across the future battlefields of Earth.